The Establishment Autie. An autistic person whose values align with those of society and whose special interests, talents and capabilities are deemed useful by the system. An establishment Autie may not feel the same need to explore or understand their own autistic identity or seek out a community of others with whom they share similar experiences, on the basis that they don't consider themselves too outcast by the milieu in which they find themselves. They simply don't experience the same confusion of identity, chronic lack of self-worth, and agonising loneliness that defines the lives of many autistic people, which is largely what impels them to look for a community, explore their neurodivergence, and perhaps look for a diagnosis in the first place. Naturally, the communication and sensory style of the Establishment Autie is markedly different from their contemporaries and colleagues, which they may or may not mask. They are still autistic after all, but due to having the same interests and values, these differences can be overlooked, either by the Establishment Autie themselves or by their colleagues and contemporaries. Brutally honest confession. In my professional life, I have often found Establishment Auties among the most challenging people to work with. Whilst both being autistic, our worldviews are poles apart. This makes for very lively, albeit intense debating, as neither side will yield easily. What I find most fascinating, though, is their rigid and vehement opposition of the proposed way of life that would benefit the majority of people who are just like them, bar in values, but who are not lucky or fortunate enough to have special interests and values that society finds useful. And what's more is that the Establishment Autie may not be able or willing to see this. An Establishment Autie parent may struggle more to understand why their autistic child finds the world so difficult. What doesn't help in these situations is squandering all of my energy on trying to get the Establishment Autie parent to see the world from their child's perspective. This is often a futile exercise and causes them to resist more strongly. What I find helpful is talking about their experience, perhaps by asking them about how difficult they find certain situations. Imagine if you weren't self-employed and had to work for someone. Imagine being told what to do all day. To which they might respond, "Nope, definitely not. That wouldn't happen." At that point, I inform them that that is how their child experiences the world, and hopefully by that point, they understand their child's experience a little better. Crude summary. If we permit the Autie and the Establishment Autie all the time in the world to pursue their special interests to their peak, the Autie, without support, may drift further and further away from financial independence and a solid friend circle. The Establishment Autie, on the other hand, will soar immediately into prosperity and will find a group of people who may recognise the Establishment Autie's sensory and communication differences, but are willing to tolerate these on the basis they share the same values and interests. The Establishment Autie is still an Autie at the end of the day, so if those in their friendship circle exhibit similar interests, then that is good enough for them. We need autistic advocacy so that we can make society more inclusive of neurodivergence and different ways of experiencing the world. Not all autistic people are lucky enough to become successful simply by pursuing their special interests. Most of us have to suffer greatly before we can get to where we wish to be. This is nothing against the Establishment Autie. I find them to be very fascinating and in some ways enviable people. I somehow think that many of them might take their positions for granted, but then again, many may not even consider for a moment that they're autistic. Lucky them. Would you rather be an Autie, unconscious of their autistic identity and thriving in the system, or an Autie who is fully aware of their autistic identity and is part of the neurodivergent community, but cannot possibly navigate the system? If you are a parent, how many of your partners are Establishment Auties?